So this is just going to be a short little insert, little reading from this book, Fear of Glass, that I received it as a gift back in 2004. It still has like the original letter, the note in it, but I want to read the back cover and see if it strikes any interesting chords with you. Barcelona at the end of the 20s. Mies van der Rohe is commissioned to design the German contributions for the 1929 International Exhibition, one of them being the German Pavilion. Today, his brief for this building reads like a manifesto of modern architecture. A contemporary building, an imposing stage, a timeless work of art, an outstanding example of where the attempt to solve the puzzle of modern architecture took shape. So that kind of struck me. Shortly before Germany embarks on a catastrophe for civilization, a German architect creates a masterpiece of the avant-garde, an icon of modern architecture. I think it's interesting to explore this, so stay tuned. Thanks for listening. Fear of Glass, Act 1, Scene 2. We no longer look at Doric temples, centuries of discipline, in the only real sense of the word, the discipline of terrorism, of pain, of the prison, have rendered the Doric temple the paradigm of a well-designed system, a systematically organized shape, giving rise to the compact, imaginary classical order. What we see in a Doric temple are the columns which traveling architects always inevitably sketch and photograph, and the synatic correspondences and correlations among its elements. But that's not what the Greeks saw in a Doric temple. What they saw was, in fact, an image of the discontinuous, of the disintegrated. Their gaze was not fixed on the screen of their peristyle. It did not merely take in the building's mass, well balanced between the sky and the ground. Rather, it went straight in, past the columns and into the cella, the body of the temple, the house of God, built in the fashion of any Mediterranean traditional house, along the lines of the primitive megaron, the central hall of a large Mycenaean dwelling. And it was this house that the Greeks saw in a Doric temple. For the temple was the house of God, and it is differed from other houses only in that it did not admit visitors. A twofold prohibition separated this house from the lai's person, a screen of columns placed between the viewer and the house, and a platform which raised the ground of the house from the ground of the visitor, thus increasing the distance between them. The house was thus always perceived from beyond a double barrier, and architecturally the house has been built as an image of the viewer's twofold exclusion. What we call a Doric temple is the time and space in which a house was perceived behind a row of columns and raised on a platform to separate it from the approaching reverent onlooker. It is easy to deduce how the force of custom came to dull the perception of this architecture if we bear in mind that the transformations the idea of the temple underwent in the Hellenistic period consistently emphasizes the disconnection between the house and the barriers. It became customary to integrate the elements, and according to the rows of columns and platforms we made much stronger, or the house much smaller, in order that the discontinuity remained recognizable. As the temple lost meaning in terms of formal public worship and ritual. That's interesting. It became increasingly difficult to notice the shape of this architecture. Thus, eventually, the myth of order, the myth of composition, of classical fullness and continuity was created. The German Pavilion is a Doric temple. The pavilion is composed of 3 elements: the cella or hall, the stylobate or platform on which the row of columns stand, and their peristyle, the columns themselves, whose independence from one another is in Hellenistic fashion emphasized. The row of columns is so disproportionately deformed that, grown huge, it does not fit on the platform. It remains exempt outside the pavilion grounds, overflowing towards the visitor standing in plain sight in the foreground.